eating carbs has become equal to obesity in our world today.
A large proportion of the population with obesity or diabetes would benefit from restricting carbohydrates.
Obese world population. Okay, so that's 1 in 3 people. That's a lot of us they're telling to not eat bread, pasta, and rice. But why?
What this diet does is it is high in fat and protein, and that satiates your brain and reduces your hunger.
Okay, more carbs, more cravings, and hunger.
Many people are actually unaware that they're carbohydrate intolerant.
The weight just fell off and I was enjoying my food. I felt fantastic. My exercise capacity increased and I got to the end of that and I just couldn't believe it.
And these benefits have been so compelling that cutting out carbs has infiltrated every part of our daily life. Restaurants are offering it, celebrities are preaching it.
I do a high, protein, very low carb.
Athletes are touting it.
LeBron James and Carmelo Anthony and Kobe Bryant, 3 of the biggest stars in American basketball, are now on low carb eating.
We even have low carb versions of all the carby goodness we love. Nothing like having our taco and eating it too, huh? Okay, maybe not. But is this all true? Do we really need to say goodbye to 70% of the grocery store, ignore 90% of a restaurant menu, and navigate family dinners and parties awkwardly, saying no to the burgers, pizzas, and fries shoved at us by our thin friends who unfairly can gorge on all that deliciousness without second thought? Or are we trapped in a web of lazy science, money, and politics? To untangle this web, let's use the story of my co-coach, Lucy. As a kid, Lucy was bigger than her sister, and her family frequently reminded her of this fact with light-hearted teasing at every opportunity. While it was said in jest to Lucy, it felt shameful. She didn't feel like it was a joke, and she felt embarrassed about her size. A feeling that kept surfacing when she couldn't keep up with friends on hikes, when she had to shop in the bigger sized clothing section than her friends, when she was made fun of at school, even if it wasn't directly about her weight. Like most of us, she started with things that promised the fastest results: starvation diets and tons of exercise. When those failed, she switched to something that looked slower but had tons of testimonials: calorie counting. At first, things were going well. She was watching pounds drop week after week. She felt thrilled. She was over the moon. She could almost taste the victory. But then after 7 weeks, her adherence to calorie counting started to wane. She was sick of going to a restaurant and trying to pick the lowest calorie option, of spending hours trying to find swaps for beloved foods. As a result, sticking to her calorie target became harder and harder until her weight loss stalled. She felt confused, disappointed, and frustrated. She felt calorie counting wasn't working for her anymore. So she went back to Google, searching high and low until she hit upon an article saying a lot of people's bodies can't process carbs, which causes them to cling to body fat. This is my problem, she thought. Hello. This is Coach Richa, interrupting storyteller Richa to break down how this is a key turning point toward Lucy, or anyone, starting the descent into low-carb web. There are 3 very common sequence of events happening. First, Lucy was aiming for a 500 calorie deficit, which for her size was a 30% calorie deficit. This is huge. At first, her body was like, whoa, are we in a famine or is this a one-off? Maybe it's a one-off, and we have plenty of fat reserves right now, so let's hold off on action for now. This is why when you first start any diet, no matter how extreme, you don't feel much hunger or cravings. But then after months went by, her body was like, it's official, we're in a famine, we've already lost so much of our fat reserves, and she's doing a terrible job finding food. We're not gonna survive this. Pump up the hunger hormones and cravings to motivate her to hunt for food now. If Lucy had set a milder deficit, she wouldn't be going through intense bouts of cravings and hungers in just 7 weeks. But you know what? Even if she had set a milder deficit, she still would have failed because her approach to calorie counting was wrong. She thought of her food choices as low calorie or high calorie. That's it. There was no in between. So of course, when it came to cooking, she'd spend hours trying to replace every ingredient with the lowest calorie thing possible. She always bought the lowest calorie popcorn, always ordered a sandwich with no bread or cheese, and even RSVP'd no to parties because it'd be hard to say no to foods. Come on, who can live like like that. No wonder she broke. If Lucy had instead seen calories more like budgeting money, then it would have allowed her to eat some chocolate daily if she wished. She could have bought that full-fat yogurt that satisfies her so much more. She could actually partake in some of the pizza her roommate had ordered as takeout. Isn't this so much easier to sustain? But since she didn't, it led to the very normal frustration of feeling like she's doing so much, but seeing no progress on the scale. The cycle of trying to stick to the low-calorie option, then failing at sticking to it, then the immediate guilt and shame from it, and then not meeting her targets, then her weight stalling. That's a lot. It caused her to feel awful about herself. Add to that feeling lost and helpless on how to change things to make it work, and you have the perfect setup for believing a message like your body may be carb inefficient, which is why you can't lose weight. But remember, whenever Lucy did meet her calorie target, and with much of it coming from carbs, she lost weight. So her body wasn't carb inefficient. It wasn't broken. What was broken were her systems to set sane targets and effectively meet them. But nobody told her that. Continuing our story, Lucy dug into the science of why carbs cause people to cling to body fat. She found that it has to do with insulin resistance. Here's how it happens. One of the nutrients that food gets broken down into is glucose, which your organs need for functioning. Insulin is what shuttles the glucose from your bloodstream into your organs. And there's a specific amount or threshold of insulin that your organs need to detect for them to open up and absorb glucose. Now, if you overeat, a higher amount of glucose floods your bloodstream, and thus a higher amount of insulin is needed to shuttle it all into your organs. Over time, as overeating keeps happening, your organs start expecting a higher threshold of insulin amount to be met before they will open up to accept glucose. This is a problem because you won't hit that higher threshold every time you eat, which leaves too much glucose in your bloodstream. So your liver clears it all up by converting it into fat. Fat not only stores energy, but also makes hormones and other substances that causes chronic inflammation, which in turn can push the insulin threshold even higher, making this whole cycle worse and worse over time. This is insulin resistance. Now, the reason people say to cut carbs to reverse insulin resistance is because carbs break down mostly into glucose, and thus need more insulin to be cleared up than proteins or fats. This is why carbs as a whole tend to be higher on the glycemic index, an index that rates foods by how much glucose it releases into the bloodstream. Furthermore, when the high amounts of glucose in your bloodstream from eating carbs get cleared up, your body observes a sudden crash in glucose, which you experience as a sudden drop in energy. Sudden changes always freak our bodies out, so it starts pumping hunger and craving hormones to make you hunt for instant energy foods. And what gives us instant energy? Carbs. Lucy felt like she was having a total breakthrough. She did have a history of eating a lot of carbs, which must mean her body had produced so much insulin over the decades that she must be insulin resistant at this point, which meant her body was prone to converting whatever she ate into fat more than her thin friends, and eating carbs was what was causing her to overeat because experience told her she loved eating carbs. Clearly, all roads pointed to avoiding carbs. It all made sense. But does it though? The core premise in all of this is that when you eat more carbs, you produce more glucose and then insulin to clear it up. But the glycemic index was developed in a lab setting based on eating 50-gram carbs alone in a fasted state. On a daily basis, do you eat your meals like that? I bet you normally don't only eat carbs, but mix it up with other food groups like proteins and fats. And guess what? When you mix it up like that, the glucose spike is smaller, and correspondingly, the insulin spike needed to clear it up is smaller. For example, potatoes are high glycemic index food, but if you combine them with salmon and broccoli, the glycemic index of this meal is lower than eating potatoes alone. Similarly, some of the low-carb proponents will tell you to cut out high net carb fruits like orange. But oranges also contain a lot of fiber, which again creates a smaller glucose and insulin spike. But guess what do we consume by itself without adding protein or fiber? All the refined foods. Soda, energy drinks, desserts, refined grains, and so on. This is the stuff we pound down in large volumes in one go, especially because a lot of junk foods are combinations of high carbs and high fats, which feel super palatable to our body, so we find it hard to stop. In fact, in nature, foods that are both high carb and high fat are rare. Breast milk is one of a small handful of examples. Our bodies don't know how to deal with this modern invention of high carbs and high fat foods. Now, since junk and sweets are all mainly sugar, they're categorized under carbs, which leads to the overly simplified thinking of cut out all carbs. But as you can see, the problem isn't with all carbs. It's only the carbs we eat in large volumes without mixing it with whole foods that is junk and sweets. While that disproves carbs causing overeating, let's discuss the second argument. There are research studies which show low carb causes improvement in insulin resistance. Note that in the studies where low carb caused improvement in insulin resistance, the low carb group also lost a lot of weight. So is it low carb that caused improved insulin resistance or the weight loss? As Yale Diabetes Center Dr. Silvio Inzucchi says in this Washington Post article, obesity leads to insulin resistance with less evidence for a relationship in the other direction. What will improve insulin resistance if you have it is losing weight no matter if you lost that weight through low carb, calorie counting, macro counting, intermittent fasting, whatever else. The method doesn't matter. And finally, the keto argument of switching to burning to fat for fuel instead of stored carbs, aka glycogen. Every credible study shows that people who lose fat while doing keto also have to be in a calorie deficit. If they aren't, they don't lose fat even while in ketosis. There is no magic to low carb, folks. Okay. At this point in the story, Lucy doesn't know any of this and jumps into a less than 100 grams carbs per day plan. That first week, she felt so much more energetic than ever before. And to put a cherry on top of the low carb cake, she was losing weight those first few weeks so much faster than she ever did with calorie counting. This proved that all the low carb science was correct. Carbs were what had been stopping her weight loss and making her low energy. So that higher energy suddenly, what do you think happens when you cut your cake, croissant, pasta, soda, and chips consumption by a fourth? You guessed it. You no longer have as big as spikes, so you no longer have as low crashes, ergo, you're experiencing more constant energy throughout the day. Do you have to do low carb to reduce junk and sweets consumption? Nope. You can do it on any old plan. Now, for the rapid weight loss drop in the first few weeks, that is indeed what happens. But it's not fat loss. Here's why. When you eat more carbs than your body needs immediately, your body stores it as glycogen. Why? A primary role of carbs is to provide you with immediate energy. For example, if you suddenly broke into a run to catch a bus, your body switches to burning mainly carbs because carbs are more quickly converted into energy, which your muscles then use to enable your sudden run. Other fuel sources like fats and protein are inefficient sources of energy, which is why your body doesn't prefer to rely on them for moderate to intense exercise. That is where there's a sudden high demand for instant constant supply of energy. For example, if it's ever happened to you that at the start of a workout you felt amazing and then suddenly out of nowhere mid-workout you started feeling sluggish, what happened was you ran out of carbs to burn. Among endurance athletes, this is called hitting the wall or the bonk. So naturally, when you eat more carbs than you need to burn immediately, your body stores carbs as glycogen so that it's ready for whenever you need to suddenly break into a run or climb stairs. But when it stores carbs as glycogen, each gram of glycogen has to be stored with 2.7 grams of water. Altogether, this adds weight to your body, which is not fat, just glycogen and water weight. But of course, when you see the scale, it just appears as weight. And when you start a low-carb diet, your body is not getting enough carbs to fuel our activities. So when you do a sudden jog to the bus or climb stairs, your body raids your glycogen stores, and if you're also in a calorie deficit, which naturally happens when you eliminate your usual round of junks and sweets, you of course see a big drop in your weight because you're not only losing fat due to the calorie deficit, but also losing a bunch of glycogen and water weight alongside it. This probably makes you super happy and your belief in low carb being key to weight loss is affirmed. And the opposite happens if one day you decide to eat out or have higher carb foods. When you suddenly have more carbs that you didn't have on your low carb diet, even if you maintain your calorie deficit, your body goes, oh my God, finally some efficient fuel, store it away. And so when you hop on a scale, you see your weight go up, and that makes you unhappy even if what you're seeing is just glycogen and water weight. It can't be fat gain because you maintain your calorie deficit, but your mind blames carbs. And this again reaffirms your beliefs that carbs equal fat gain, when as you can see, this is not true at all. Okay, so Lucy was loving her low carb plan until her weight loss stalled again. Since cutting carbs had helped her before, she figured that she could cut even more carbs. This time, she went all in by starting keto. No, Lucy, this is just like playing poker with just one card. How do you expect to win? If cutting carbs is your only card to play every time your weight loss doesn't go right, there's only so much carb you can cut. And as I mentioned earlier, studies have shown even people in ketosis don't lose weight if they aren't in a calorie deficit. But now you're in ketosis, having said goodbye to all carbs forever, and your weight loss gets stuck. Now what? Honestly, Lucy is all of us here. We fall into this tunnel vision because of how normalized lazy low-carb science has become through mass politicking and marketing. Let me explain. It all started when George McGovern, a South Dakota senator, visited the Pritikin Health Clinic in the 1970s, where he was stunned to see the dramatic health benefits of consuming a higher whole plant-based food diet than Americans typically ate. After consulting with researchers who conducted studies on the effect of animal-based products on cardiovascular disease and cancer, he recommended to the US Senate to cut back on animal-based foods like meat, eggs, and dairy, and fill in the space left with whole plant-based foods. This caused a big backlash from politicians and the electorate alike, as it would immediately negatively affect the dairy and livestock industry. As a result, the recommendation was scaled back to recommend reducing red meat, not white meat, a political decision, not a scientific one. The main recommendation was to eat more whole plant-based foods, but they still needed to put some quantitative guideline on how much to reduce animal-based food consumption without saying outright, folks, reduce meat, eggs, and dairy, because that would never get approved in the Senate due to fear of losing livestock farmer votes. Racking their brains, they realized that fat was a nutrient Americans mainly got from animal-based foods, so they decided to use fats as a proxy to set a numerical guideline for reducing animal-based food consumption. This was set at 30%. Their hope was the gap would then be filled in with plant-based foods, but instead how this got communicated to the public was only about reducing fats. The more part of the guideline to eat more whole plant-based foods got lost, and thus, unsurprisingly, the gap got filled with processed foods instead, like breakfast cereals, donuts, and a slew of sugary products. This, of course, led to sugar cravings, overeating, and didn't stop the growing obesity epidemic. On top of that, as the market got overwhelmed with low-fat foods, products, and programs, new weight loss businesses struggled to stand out. And that's when the classic marketing tactic happened. Shout something different. This leads to two layers to any weight loss product. The science part, actually causing it to work. This can be applied sustainably and enjoyably to suit your lifestyle. And then the marketing part, that's sold as science but is not science. If a diet is unsustainable, it is this part that's the culprit. So for low carb, the science is simply a calorie deficit and focus on whole fats and proteins instead of junk and sweets. To be clear, any diet that causes fat loss relies on this. The marketing part is the extreme reduction of carbs, which isn't necessary for fat loss, but makes for a great way to stand out in a crowded weight loss market. The low carb marketers have been a boon to the dairy and livestock industry, who separately and together with these marketers fund low carb science papers and ads to promote the healthiness of high fat diets. All of this mass marketing has resulted in mass normalization. We hear celebrities are doing low carb. We watch our favorite athletes talk about it. We walk into a restaurant and the menu has low carb options. We have low carb versions of every naturally high carb product. With this barrage of low carb messaging, what are we, an unsuspecting person trying to go about our days, supposed to think? Of course we think this is what's healthy. And the irony is this is the exact opposite of what the original nutrition recommendation was: to eat more whole foods. As in, we need all the nutrients. Don't target each nutrient as if one is better or worse than the rest. The big picture has been lost. Let me ask you, what's the point of your weight loss? Isn't it to live your dream life? Do you picture in your dream life struggling perpetually to feel better after having an extra slice of cake? You wouldn't need to justify it if you didn't feel bad about what you're doing. How is feeling guilt and shame every time you reach for what you think are bad foods good for your mental health? Do you picture your dream life with Thanksgiving dinners without the traditional mashed potatoes, gravy, and bread? Do you picture your dream life involving travels to countries like, for example, Singapore, and then not eating most of their cuisine because it's rice and noodles based? Do you picture your dream life involving birthday parties for your kids where you decline your child's birthday cake? We have become so focused on optimizing every tiny nutrition choice to the zenith that we have lost sight of its effect on our dream of a life lived fully. And this is exactly what Lucy realized when keto started limiting her lifestyle. She couldn't eat any of the foods she enjoyed. She was spending so much time meal prepping and planning to the point that it cut into her time with her boyfriend. At first, she was angry. She thought others had gotten unfairly lucky where they could eat whatever while she suffered with restrictions and taxes on her time. But this wasn't a helpful belief. She had to face herself and ask, am I holding on to the belief that my body is broken to feel better about never being able to stick to plans? And it's when she honestly answered this question that she started letting go of methods that she would never be able to sustain, and instead focused her energy into figuring out how to make sustainable plans for herself. So, Do what's enjoyable and sustainable for you. If that means eating carbs, go for it. And this is totally possible if you use the full deck of cards in the weight loss game. Marketing has convinced you that you have only one card to play for your body, but this is not true. That's just a marketing tactic. You have two options at this point. One, if you feel that you'd love my help in learning to play your full deck of cards, then check out the free sneak peek into my Badass Body Blast program in the description and comments below. Or if you want to DIY it, then you don't want to ignore this video where I explain what I do if I was losing weight again. You can avoid all of the mistakes and jump to the hard-earned lessons through years of trying to lose weight and coaching hundreds of weight loss clients right here. Check it out. And always remember, you can do it.